In this episode, we are going to be reviewing They Won't Believe Me, the film noir from 1947. This was directed by Irving Pichel, and it was produced by Joan Harrison, starring Jane Greer, Robert Young, Susan Hayward, and Rita Johnson. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a podcast where I explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film. I want to welcome back the author Christina Lane today, who's the Edgar Award-winning author of Phantom Lady that we discussed when she was last on, Hollywood producer Joan Harrison, the Forgotten Woman Behind Hitchcock. She is also a professor of film studies in the Cinematic Arts Department at the University of Miami, where she teaches courses in film history, gender, and directors. And some of her other books are Feminist Hollywood, From Born in Flames to Point Break, and Magnolia, which is on my reading list next year, because that's a film I really like. Christina, welcome back. Thanks so much for joining me again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I really like this film a lot, and I hadn't seen it before. But before we jumped into that discussion, film noir is interesting to me because people have these different definitions of what constitutes a noir and what doesn't. So I was curious what you feel, what the definition is of film noir is to you.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say it tends to have the kind of fatalistic attitude, right? It's like a mood, and so the protagonist generally tends to be a male protagonist, and he is basically on this trajectory toward doom, right? It's like fated to be, basically either to die or to just wind up in a very corrupt situation. And so that in terms of film noir is like a structure and a mood and an attitude. To me, if that's not happening, then it's not noir.
Right.
And that relates to the historical context also of being influenced by World War II and the kind of post-World War II return from, the trauma of war. And so even if you don't have an actual like World War II vet, right, or some kind of war vet in the film, usually your character is kind of a stand-in for that traumatized vet coming back and dealing with the moral disorder that war has caused. Yeah.
So as we were talking through email, I didn't realize that what people had always seen was an 80-minute version of this film, and it was only recently restored and released as a Blu-ray, and TCM put it on earlier in May, I believe, a 95-minute version. So I only saw the 80-minute version because that's the only one that you can stream. But which do you prefer? I mean, how do you feel about the two?
Yeah, and I feel really fortunate that the 95-minute version was finally released. I, for years and years, only had access to that 80-minute version. The 95-minute version is really my preference, and it's amazing. And we could certainly talk about why. But one thing that I think is important, maybe just to say at the outset, is it's not as though there's like a 15-minute, two scenes, right, that are like, tacked on like a beginning and an end or something like that, or like one long missing sequence, right, that's finally reinstalled into the film. It's really just literally 30 seconds here and a minute there, and little tiny bits and pieces.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't like a drastic chunk of the story that suddenly altered it. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So does it make a big difference, do you find?
And that's what's funny, is it makes a huge difference because it provides all this texture and give you a lot more insight into why everybody's doing what they're doing.
This has a thick plot, but also it has rich, complex characters. I mean, what do you think it's really about?
Yeah, well, so one of the things that I talk about in my book is number one, it's really interesting, right, that we have this main character played by Robert Young, Lawrence Valentine, and he's not a very likable character. He's actually very difficult even to pin down as, kind of who is he as a person. He's very indeterminate.
Right.
And so just in terms of the story that he's telling, like how reliable can we even, believe anything that he's telling us,
Right.
from the stand. And so he becomes kind of a conduit through which we do learn about these other characters, right? And so he's telling us these stories about these women that he's trying to juggle and that can maybe help us believe him, right? It's this weird thing where, let me tell you about what happened with this woman, and maybe it'll help you understand my motivation. So it actually becomes a film in a way that helps you learn about the female characters and bring them to life, and gives them all this dimension, so that ultimately you probably leave the film not caring about him. You find yourself disliking him even more like by the end of the film.
Right.
But you've met three really interesting women, especially because of their performances as well.
Oh yeah.
It's a combination of the writing and the performances. And then just to answer your question about kind of what did Joan want to do with the film, right? Like what was she thinking of with the film? Then I think she was really interested in the themes of the film, like she wanted to critique, just in her own being, right? She wanted to critique marriage. She wanted to critique romance and kind of the institutions of marriage and family. So this was a perfect, I'm sure she read this treatment, right? It was like a 127 page kind of novelette that had not been actually published. It was just kind of presented as a film treatment. And I'm sure that this was really juicy material that was all about her interests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I found it fascinating. And, this marriage that Larry has with Greta, because it's unbelievable how, when he's cheating on her with Jane Greer, and, she finds out about it. And as he's packing to leave with Jane Greer, I thought, this is so interesting. Why does she seem like she doesn't care? She's sort of like, okay, well, this is what you're gonna need to bring, and she knew how to control him. She knew that he was motivated by money, and but at the same, for anyone who hasn't seen the film, she buys an interest in a company, and she knew that if her husband then basically would get a major job there, and they would make more and more money, and she's very wealthy herself, that it would be impossible for him to leave, because he's someone which is a very noir theme. People will do anything for money at all costs. And Larry very much is that kind of character. But I thought she was so incredible at just how she played it, almost like they were just running errands. Like she just knew that he would leave Jane Greer, forget if he, you don't really know whether he actually loved any of these women or not. He says he did. But she just knew that he'll leave her, and we'll have to move to California because that's where the job was. And she takes him right out of there. So, and what I found interesting is when she finds out about the second affair with Susan Hayward, then you begin to see her mask crack a bit, and you get more of an insight, as she says, I lost self-respect when I married you, and I can't leave you. You're going to have to, walk out. But then she cleverly also calculates it in the sense, because now he'll be left, even if you leave me, you'll be left with nothing. And she basically moved out into the mountains where he didn't have a telephone, like he was a prisoner, or they're making themselves prisoners. I thought that was that must have been something that I imagine Joan, with her interest in critiquing marriage, like that these were all like like business agreements. I mean, that is really interesting. I don't know how
Yeah.
you felt about that aspect of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the just kind of, it's almost like what human beings do to each other,
Mm,
in the name of love, or
yeah,
in the name of marriage. And it just started feeling ickier and ickier, right?
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
it's
and
really fascinating because
yeah,
people sometimes, it's true, and I I'm sure we all know people like this from families or friends. I mean, they're so concerned with their image that a divorce will taint that image, particularly at that time,
mhm,
and will just live in misery in order to keep up with the surface. True,
yeah,
like we're a happy quote unquote couple,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing that I find so interesting is that even with everything that the right, the Greta is doing, I mean, she really is awful. And
Yes,
like,
yeah,
and no one would want to be married to her, no one would want to have to live like that. But even with all that, you do sympathize with her,
yeah, oh,
you
yeah, absolutely,
and there's
yeah,
that moment of vulnerability where she does say, like, the scene you're talking about, you're going to be that, it's going to have to be that you leave me.
right.
And you kind of see why, um how desperate she's gotten. And I think that, again, I mean, this film, it wasn't able to be kind of as right, as blown out, and as well made as everybody who was making it, as they wanted it to be. But so
Mhm.
even as kind of patched together as it was, you still are able to see that kind of dimension.
Yeah, no, I love that. And Rita Johnson, who played
Yeah.
Greta, I can't at the top of my head place her in anything else, but I thought she was really, I mean, everybody was, but she was just this sophisticated woman who wears these masks and we all do that in life, and just at all costs will put
Mhm.
on a happy face, even if she has to, imprison herself and her husband. But Robert Young is Larry. I mean, again, another just incredible performance. I think I've only seen Robert Young in Crossfire, but
Uh-huh.
I was just reading yesterday, being a contract player, he was deep to like 100 movies in a span of 10 years or something along those lines. Like, and if you didn't work, apparently, and I'm sure you know this, they would suspend you if you didn't take
Mhm.
an assignment, and you weren't even allowed to work in any other industry or any other job if you were on suspension. So he was doing, and he was apparently known as like a romantic lead. And I think I read that that's part of the reason why this didn't do so well, was because people just couldn't see him in this way. But
Mhm.
he humanizes the guy so much. I couldn't help but feel for this guy, even though he's so. I mean, he's a liar. He's a cheater. He's totally motivated by money. At one point, he's willing to kill his wife in order to take all of her money and go out clean, and he has no interest outside of money. I mean, even after uh, Janice and Greta, Verna and Greta are dead, and he travels the world, and he had here's this guy with all this money, everything he wants, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. He's
Mhm.
bored, and he's in like all these lavish places, and but that last scene with Jane Greer, I just thought I think that's why your heart can somewhat go out to him, at least from my point of view, because he felt so guilty. I think he felt that he deserved what he was getting, even though he didn't actually kill them. But
Mhm.
as I love that. I thought that last scene with Jane Greer was so great. When he says, I brought in my own verdict. I don't need to hear their verdict. And but just the looks on his faces, just he looks like he's disgusted with himself, and he brought this sense of guilt. I just thought it was a really incredible, complicated man. I don't know what your impression of him was.
Yeah, yeah. And we also kind of know him retroactively from Father Knows Best, from the
Right.
television, from being such an upstanding moral citizen, and Marcus Welby, MD, also. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I was raised on TV. So for me, that was where, I saw all that stuff before I saw this film.
Right.
Um, but I think a lot of those roles that he played before They Won't Believe Me were also a lot like that. He kind of held the moral,
Yeah.
kind of this moral kind of flag. And so I know that I can't tell you why he did this film. I don't know whether he went in thinking, oh, this will be a nice, alternative, like an experiment, or whether he just took it because he had to. But definitely when the film didn't do well, right, then he started saying, oh God, what a mistake.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
like boy, I was really like, almost like he was tricked into making the movie.
Right.
Like if it had done well, I think that everybody would have said, oh, that was the smartest, shrewdest move, everybody made by getting him,
Probably.
by
Yeah.
going off type.
To go, yeah, exactly, to go against type. But I know
Yeah.
that Joan Harrison was someone who was always interested in actors going against type. I mean, was she someone who pushed for him? I don't know
I
if that was something that
yeah,
came up.
yeah, I think so.
It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
she obviously had a real eye, because I thought he was great. I mean, even in Crossfire, I mean, he's a quote unquote good person in Crossfire, but it's still it's a wonderful performance. But I couldn't help but even just laugh in a dark way. Like, as soon as this car crash happens and he wakes up, and the guy beside him thinks that the woman was his wife who is killed, even though it wasn't. It was the woman he was having an affair with. And right away the wheels begin to turn. Oh, okay. If they think I'll kill my wife, and then they already think she's dead, so I can take I can take all the money. I mean, there's no there was no sense of, oh my God, this woman I was going to run away with died. There was no grief. Like that's why, to me, he was a quintessential doom protagonist, who just noir protagonist, who just is totally not only motivated by money, but also was motivated by sex. He was like the femme fatale, and he really was both. But I just thought it wasn't really until he had it all that he realized it was empty, that it meant, and that's when the guilt, really just ate away at him. I mean, to me, I think it's a reminded me of a little of a Place in the Sun, like with Montgomery Clift. He didn't kill Shelley Winters, but he killed her in his heart, and
Yeah.
so very much he did the same thing, and he ultimately pays for it. I just thought, I mean, the ending of, I know that you discussed this on TCM with Eddie Mueller, because there was a lot of problems with the ending of this, because it was meant to be a suicide. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think it was meant to be like a lot of different things, with their different stages. And
Yeah.
then I honestly think that probably what the filmmakers would have loved is for him to just escape out of the courtroom. This not to say too much, but I think that they would have loved for the jury to actually find him not guilty at the same time as he makes this break for it, and therefore
Right.
it would all actually be okay with the censors.
Right.
And
Right.
so that kind of sets up all the ingredients for what we wind up getting. But given that that was not going to fly with the censors, then for most of the making of the film, Joan Harrison was lobbying for the suicide, was lobbying for this this suicide, but even that was not going to happen, because there is this, it's a quote unquote suicide ban, with the censors, where
Mm.
where that's not good enough in terms of punishment for for someone who's done really bad things
Right.
in a film. Yeah.
Right.
And so
I like what you and Eddie Mueller talked about it on TCM. Like, it's like they're not okay with suicide, but they're okay with the police officer shooting him, as he easily, they could have just grabbed him and brought him in.
yes, exactly.
Oh God.
He would have served his time, he would have served his time or whatever, like, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a funny time in terms of that old production code.
Yeah.
Just looking at Susan Hayward, I know we touched on, again, not the black, cut and dry femme fatale. What was your impression of what she was all about? Verna, this is the Verna character.
Yeah, the Verna character. I mean, I thought, she's really great in this, right? And this was
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, and she was also her character was rounded out a lot during the there were a lot of rewrites, partly because the censors kept saying all of these characters are just, you're not giving us anybody who is at all has any kind of moral compass. You're not giving us any humane characters. And so, I think Joan Harrison's perspective was, well, that's the point. We just want everybody to be,
Human.
raunchy, right?
Right, yeah.
This is a right?
Yeah.
This is a subversive film. Everybody's taking their clothes off. Everybody's taking, just kind of letting it all hang out. But in a service to essentially, I think eventually they gave in and said, well, we have to kind of create some kind of story with some kind of some characters that you enjoy and hang on to, right? Hold on to. And so Jane Greer's character became that person that you could kind of believe in, and empathize with, and that she would essentially help to change Robert Young's character, Larry. And so the writing of that character became much more interesting. And then Jane Greer, as I do talk about in the book, was basically like a Joan Harrison find, that she was an RKO contract star, but she had not really done anything when Joan Harrison saw her for this part, and said, that you're being kind of miscast, you're being your image is just all wrong.
Right.
And so her hair was very, very dark, and she was essentially being led down this path of looking like, as Joan Harrison put it, Gail Sonderberg, she was kind of like the Spider Woman of the horror, horror movies. So she suggested that Jane Greer lighten up her hair, but not go 100% blonde, just kind of soften everything up and lighten everything up. And she changed the costuming a bit to give her these nice customized, more tailored suits. And so Jane Greer gave Joan Harrison credit for everything in her career, saying that this part led to Out of the Past, and led to her being cast for Kathy Moffat, which came right on the heels of this film.
And her character as Janice was one thing I liked about the way it opened, and I really like when films do this, is that you see them at the trial, you don't know exactly what he did. Everyone who's a witness or basically looks very guilty, and that told me that they weren't quite sure, because no one really had evidence that he did this, which was interesting. And but when you see them off the top, you just think that they're a couple who are planning a trip. You don't know he's married at this point. You don't know that this is an affair. You don't know that she's actually friends with his wife. So you get this expectation that suddenly goes into another story, whereas in a lot of conventional films, we get our introduction of characters so that when things begin, we kind of get a sense of how these people may react.
I mean, one of the things that you're talking about too, I think, is at the trial when you don't really know whose relationship to whom, and you
have to lean into it. It's not everything is just directly told, which I always really enjoyed those when stories are told like that.
Yeah, and I think that probably is a mark of Harrison as well. Yeah. Again,
looking at Verna, the Susan Hayward character, what was interesting about her is that at a certain point I thought, okay, we're getting something like Double Indemnity when they begin to plot how they're going to get money from his wife, and then it totally switches. I mean, then you find that she is not interested in the money, and even though she was, the plan was that she was going to get the money because she worked for the same company, and they figured out a way, not to go so heavily into the details, but they figured out a way how she could take the money out of their account. That was a joint account. And then she ends up she didn't even go get it. And I thought that she was really testing him to see, are you just trying to have me and the money, or am I enough? And even though he tears up her check, because she gives her own money to him, That's still in the bank. So I couldn't help but think it's interesting that he says, okay, and he goes off with her. So you can never trust this guy, because he never wanted any of these women unless money was involved. We saw that with Jane Greer. I mean, he happily walked away.
Well, I think that we get our best kind of insight with her when she isn't, when they're in her apartment,
Yes, yeah.
Right. Just because she's sexy, she's uninhibited, she's independent, and there's that kind of banter between the two of them. All of a sudden, it almost feels like you're in a different movie for a little while. Because they're kind of cute together. I don't remember whether this happens in the shorter version of the movie, but there's a moment when they're at work, or he's at work, and then he comes out to his car and she's in his car already. And so, and she's kind of like, hey, take me.
Yes, yeah, that is in the short
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, she's very forward, but not in a way that necessarily puts her, kind of, it's not too much. I mean, it all depends, I guess, on, on how, on different scenes, but especially, in the first kind of half of the film, she's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Extremely confident. I found that, it's interesting, because I thought that she had that in common in a sense with his wife, Greta, because Greta was very smart at these calculated plans with her husband to get him to follow her. And Susan Hayward was so smart at getting him to her place to start this, to begin this love affair. I mean, she sets it up that that his wife would be away so that they could have dinner together, because his wife would be expecting her. She sets up being, because she does a favor for him, and she says, well, give me a ride home sometimes. And sure enough, she's waiting for him in the car. I mean, I just thought that was so great, because that's why, to me, he's both the doomed protagonist and the femme fatale, because he was totally motivated by sex with her, and totally motivated by money with his wife, but they all knew how to control him to an extent. That's not that's the extent to it, because it gets that there's real feelings involved with the other two women. I just thought that was really, really, I don't know if that connection between those women was something that stood out to you at all.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, that if he winds up with Verna, does she just become another Rita, right? I mean, she does have a lot of those same qualities.
It's interesting. What do you feel Joan contributed the most to film noir?
Oh my gosh. That's a good question.
Or did we say too much of it already?
Yeah, well, that's a really big question. But I think that she kind of contributed to film noir a different kind of, right, she conceived a different framework, maybe we might say, because so many noirs do follow the same kind of steps, in terms of like the same logic of gender, and the same kind of if there's a chaos or there's a crisis, it's pretty much over the same thing. And she tended not to want to follow the same cliches or stereotypes. She was just interested in different themes. So yeah, she tended, she may often have had like a female protagonist, she would often have in terms of Phantom Lady, or even but if she had a male protagonist, like in this film, or even like Nocturne, where you have George Raft as the male protagonist, it would often just become much more about the women's stories.
Yes. Yeah.
Kind of diverge out into the women's stories, and really she would work hard to show them as subjects and do it visually. I mean, what's interesting is she really didn't want to direct. She wasn't a director, but she would work, I think, really closely with the director.
Yeah.
To make sure that the visual storytelling reinforced her ideas.
And what's interesting, just as you were talking about the female characters, we see which, generally, especially then, you saw that the men were the one running things in control, and the women were reacting off of the men's stories. I mean, generally, I mean, not that it was like that all the time, but here we see that he is the one who's not capable, and they are the ones in control, and they're the ones running things, and he's more, in a way, it's like it's his story, but it's yet it's also more their story. And I thought that was really fascinating, because you didn't really, I mean, even now that's a problem, that you see men are always more capable, and which is so unfortunate. But I mean, here we see a real flip on that, and it turns him more cowardly and weak-minded and stuff like that. So I love that. I love that about it. Do you know much about the relationship with Joan and the director in this film?
I don't, I mean, I know
That's
that
Irving Pichel. Yeah, Irving Pichel, because he didn't do the other noirs, I believe, that she produced.
Right. Yeah, this was the only film that they worked on together. And I know he was part of the Algonquin Roundtable, and he did a lot of films that were, kind of on the extreme left. He, came from a really progressive background, and she loved working with those kinds of directors and writers. So they would have had a natural affinity for each other. And later, I believe he was blacklisted, which was also tended to happen with, a lot of the people that she worked with, unfortunately. Right. But the main thing that I know is that he was kind of an actor's director, so he focused more on performances.
Oh, interesting. Was there anything else that you wrote in the book about this film that really interested you in Joan's struggles with it, or anything else?
Well, I mean, the main thing that I talk about is just she was trying so hard to bring scenes in and basically allow the women in the film to have moments where they were like, sexually liberated, or they were kind of just expressing themselves. And yet she was stopped all the time, right, by the censors, essentially. And I could tell just from the letters that were going back and forth and the memos and the conference notes that she was extremely frustrated, because it wasn't even subtle. Basically, she would be told straight out of Joseph Green's mouth, if the man is forcing himself on, Verna, well, then that's okay. It's okay for him to kiss her forcibly. But if she's expressing any, sensual like desire for him, then that's not allowed, right? Or right. And so,
which is so ridiculous.
I can only imagine, because I think that she probably went into the film believing that she could make something that would be much more kind of passionate and saucy, and just kind of like really, really just kind of sexual, right? So pushing those boundaries. And unfortunately, it was almost like a backlash against her, right? Where she's just being told, no, you better have the, if it doesn't look like rape, if it doesn't look like sexual assault, then you're not allowed to play it. And she wasn't going to do that,
Right.
So
of course,
it just seems like a really, really frustrating film for her to work on. And that was, by the time it was over, she was pushed out of RKO altogether,
Yeah.
So,
because is this when Howard Hughes was running it at this point? Yeah.
So he had come in, I think it may have been 6 months in, so basically she was in the middle of production of They Won't Believe Me when he came in.
Okay.
And she just saw the writing on the wall, and then that's when she leaves, but she does land nicely with Robert Montgomery.
Well, even with all her issues in this film, they certainly delivered a really, really good, strong film that just, I think, had a lot of great characters and just a great melodramatic plot that I thought it was really, really great. So I'm definitely going to get the Blu-ray to see the 95 minutes. And the book, again, is called Phantom Lady, Hollywood producer Joan Harrison, The Forgotten Woman Behind Hitchcock. And for anyone watching or listening, I spoke to Christina about a month or so ago, more on the book, and we talked about Suspicion, which was directed by Hitchcock and co-written by Joan Harrison. So I highly recommend the book. It's really, really great. Was there any other thoughts you had on the film, Christy? I think, or did we cover most of it?
We did cover most of it. You know, it has some really great like optical effects, you know, visually. It's I highly recommend people watching it, especially the Blu-ray, because the Blu-ray really does bring all that out nicely.
Yeah, because the only streaming service, it's called archive.org. So it's through a library service. And you could tell it's not the restored, you could tell it's like a bit of a grainy print. So I imagine the Blu-ray is quite beautiful. So I'll certainly have to get that. Well, Christina, thanks so much again for taking the time to come out. I really appreciate it. And please come again, because like I said, I'm going to read your other books, and Joan, obviously. So there's a lot more to say down the road, but so please come again sometime.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. If you are now currently listening to this on the audio version of the podcast, there are a lot more episodes on the YouTube channel. So if you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies, where every single episode I've ever done can be found. I am also on Patreon. For those of you who don't know what Patreon is an exclusive membership program at a monthly fee, a very low price fee, where creators such as myself create bonus content for fans of ours who tune in to our podcast. Musicians use it. All sorts of different artists use it, and it helps creators to keep creating free content on their podcasts or YouTube channels and stuff like that. So there are different tiers you can check out. It's similar to the YouTube channel, but a little bit different. And there also is polls that you can vote on every single month. So you very much are a part of the decision making that goes into what I do every single month on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so, as I am trying to monetize the YouTube channel. Just press the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it right here floating above my head to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release a new video or when I go live. Thank you so much, folks. I will see you in the next episode.